Partnership. Hayley is a Sustainable Growth Manager for the EA, and more recently she's become the Programme Manager for the West Midlands and the River Severn Partnership. Hayley acts as the catalyst for the joint infrastructure delivery with various stakeholders across the local and national government bodies, and also the public and private sector, really to ensure that climate resilience is embedded in wider policy and investment decision making. Today, Hayley is going to present an overview of the River Severn Partnership, and she's also going to cover adaptive planning, which is a national pilot. She'll also explain how this is going to influence decision making on water management. So over to you, Hayley, please. I don't know if you're on mute, Hayley. We can't hear you.
Me now. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Brilliant, thank you. So thanks, Juliana, and hello to everybody. I'm Hayley Deighton. So as Juliana said, I'm Sustainable Growth Manager for the Environment Agency covering the West Midlands area. And then through that role, I've kind of picked up River Severn Partnership, its evolution, and now kind of program manage that. So I'm going to just talk you through initially River Severn Partnership. What is that? Where's it come from? What's it trying to achieve? And then where we are now in terms of some ministerial support to lead national pilots, particularly around a long-term strategy and adaptive pathway thinking. So thanks, Kat. So I thought it'd be good to start just with a reflection for all of us on the complexity that we face across the River Severn catchment area and the uncertainty going forward. So as a group of organisations, we know we're already managing significant environmental issues and that these are likely to increase over time in the context of climate change. So flood risk, clearly that's been very visible recently. And you can see here some of the direct impacts around the kind of flooding from fluvial sources there on businesses and homes, but also then the indirect impacts on some of the kind of connectivity and road infrastructure and what that might mean for kind of job security and creation. Alongside that then, we've also got a hugely significant area in terms of environmental value. So you can see there, it's highly important for agricultural productivity, and we've got some significant assets like the AONB. And that's really driving the area in terms of making it attractive for people, for visitors and for investors. And off the back of that, we are seeing some significant growth plans. So we know for Shrewsbury, we've got the Big Town Plan, but challenges in delivering some of that against government targets. So an undersupply of homes and real challenges there on finding the right sites to deliver that. And then wrapped around all of that, we have the climate change and real uncertainty around what that's going to mean and the impacts that's going to have then across some of those other drivers. So as a collective group of organisations, the River Severn Partnership, we all want to deliver positive outcomes across our communities, but we have a challenge here around how we navigate some of this complexity and uncertainty, and how do we therefore make the right decisions at the right time and in the right locations. And that's really what the River Severn Partnership agenda is all about. Thanks, Kat. So in coming together over the last 18 months, we've been sharing evidence across our respective partner organisations and having some really honest conversations around the reality that we face and that doing nothing probably isn't an option for us. We know that climate change is high on the public and the political agenda. And there's some real challenges around that. So nationally, we know that 5.2 million homes and businesses are already at risk of flooding, that we need about £1 billion a year just to keep pace with climate change, that the costs of that are going to be spread across homes, businesses and infrastructure. So it's really widespread. And then we've got to balance that out with likely water shortages over the next 25 years. And then the water quality. So we've got about 14% of water bodies at good status when the target's about 75%. So nationally, big challenges, but what does that mean locally? And some of the data here you can see is around what we've been looking at for the River Severn catchment. So land value of over 30 billion and about 250 kilometres of main roads at risk. And that means direct impacts on around about 100,000 jobs. So already significant challenges, but then we're looking at climate change increasing river levels by between 1 and 1.5 metres in a 1 in 100 year event. And for kind of Shropshire and Telford, that's going to mean potentially about an additional 80 hectares of urban suburban land at risk. We bounce very quickly, though, from kind of that too much water into too little water. So we're looking here at potential naturally available reductions in water of about 20 to 25% by as early as 2050. So some big, big challenges for us. And so as a River Severn Partnership, thanks, Kat, next slide, what we're looking at are those challenges, recognising that actually no one organisation can deal with that alone. But in doing so, can we harness some opportunities and really drive some benefits across the area? So in terms of place shaping, you often see kind of growth being driven by transport corridors, and people use that as an infrastructure asset to kind of improve connectivity. The partnerships really started looking at the river network, and actually can you do the same by using a river system? We have a unique unifying asset in the River Severn. It's Britain's longest river network, and it joins multiple communities through high quality environment along its whole length. So how do we, through managing some of these environmental risks and kind of looking across the piece around those environmental challenges, harness more of the value? So can we use that river system to kind of create a unique identity for us that creates locational advantages, that's driven bottom up by what communities and our kind of businesses and people need, but also then unlocks more investment. So this is all about moving from single issue service delivery like flood risk management or kind of water resource management into that holistic integrated approach across the whole catchment area. Thanks, Kat. And there's an opportunity in this. So the reality is that there is a government commitment around growth and development. For a long time now, there's been a focus on accelerating and delivering more homes, how you balance that out with the infrastructure and use that to kind of increase jobs. And that emphasis is really increasing given the kind of whole COVID recovery and the need to kind of improve kind of the economics across kind of UK PLC. And within that, we are really minded that we have to move sustainable growth from one of just environmental protection into true kind of environmental net gain and betterment. And there's a real role here for water management through that whole catchment-based approach to use it as an asset in place shaping, to truly create resilient places over the long term, and to make sure as a collective group of organisations we all make the right decisions across policy and infrastructure. And within this, then, that we play a real part in that kind of resilient recovery and renewal. Thanks, Kat. So the partnership's role is all around resilience, and that isn't just about environmental resilience, but looking at the role environmental management will have on social and economic resilience in the future. So you can see some of the points here we're looking at around reducing impacts around future shocks, improving productivity, thinking about those supply chains and what role environmental management will have in that, how we can reduce some of those environmental barriers into kind of land use development, making sure we get it in the right place, that we can innovate. So this really is about the whole green economy, transferring opportunities and diversification. And as collective then that we kind of do make those right investment decisions, and we can test out new ways of working, new financial models, and think about the whole kind of social well-being agenda within that. So a big agenda for the River Severn Partnership, but I think quite an exciting one that draws together the environment with the social and the kind of economic drivers. Thanks, Kat. Over the last 18 months then, the River Severn Partnership, I think quite rightly, has been on a path of natural evolution. Lots and lots of conversations have taken place and continue to take place around the ambition here. What is that shared agenda across the whole catchment area? Who are the individual organisations and what are their objectives? What does that mean as a collective? And therefore, what does that mean as a kind of work programme going forward? And within this, we've also had the two largest flood events on record on the Severn within a 10-month window. And that's really meant that we're starting to rethink some of the challenges that do face us, recognition that we can't do it alone, and that as a collective through the River Severn Partnership, we do have a significant opportunity. Off the back of that, in March last year, we were asked to go to London on Budget Day and participate in a parliamentary debate where ministers really gave us significant support for this holistic, integrated approach to catchments. That secured us a 46-strong all-party MP caucus. So that MP caucus is now part of the River Severn Partnership governance and really helps us with that kind of political platform and the lobbying piece. And we have also secured through the partnership quite significant investment of around £50 million to accelerate some capital schemes, which the Environment Agency are driving, but also then start looking at that long-term strategy up to 2100 and beyond, and how that might shape future ways of working going forward. So within this kind of time frame, we're now in a position of transitioning from that visioning scoping stage into really beginning to understand that work programme and the structure we need around that to make it happen. Thanks, Kat. This slide here I've just put in to kind of illustrate the kind of scale we're talking at here. It's something like 6,000 square miles. It covers 2 devolved nations. This is about that joint working with across Wales and England, and kind of multiple local authorities, multiple LEPs, multiple regulatory authorities, infrastructure providers, NGOs. So a real kind of powerhouse of organisations coming together with a shared aim about working collaboratively, that we have an opportunity here to use Britain's longest river network to drive resilient and sustainable growth through innovation in environmental management. Thanks, Kat. So the partnership agenda that we've kind of signed up to as a group of organisations is really one around that holistic shared approach across the whole catchment area, that through that big strategic partnership we can start addressing some of the mega trends. So around the climate change, this is a rural economy, so how do we best respond to Brexit and test some of that out, and then the role of that green recovery in kind of economic recovery with COVID. This is about systems thinking and leadership, so moving away, as I said, from that single issue service delivery into understanding the role of the river in a wider system that brings together some of the social economic drivers, and how through those group of organisations we provide leadership on that, on a source to sea approach. And through that we can start maximising the impact of every public pound. So each partner organisation has access to different funding pots. How do we bring that together to maximise the benefit across that? And that we take that collective responsibility for some big decisions and that complexity and uncertainty around climate change. Thanks, Kat. So this is just an overview of where we've got to with that partnership work programme. And one of the first challenges that I'm facing and the partnership's facing is around needing to deliver in the short term to meet some of those political expectations and some of those kind of financial requirements, but also not to take our eye off the long term and how we do transform, how do we learn and go beyond kind of current ways of working into addressing some of those challenges to 2100. So this is about kind of the long term as well as the short term. And you can see here that top box, that's kind of starting to map out what are those long-term objectives. So in here, we've got an adaptive pathway pilot around the processes, the framework that we need to embed across all our organisations. There's then a strategy that's going to tell us what do we need to do and where. And then we're going to need tools in the toolbox to help all of us do this. This is around some of the mapping, understanding some of the benefits, and then how do we do engagement from kind of bottom up and top down and bring that together. And then we need to test that out. So there is a here and now. People are investing in this geography. How do we best bring that all together, see where the alignment is, look at scopes and how we can scale up. And so we've got emerging here some demonstrator programs around some cross-cutting themes and some place-based working to really kind of pull projects together, business cases together, and start shaping this over the short to medium term. So that's a real challenge, but something the partnership's starting to grapple with. And if we look at the next slide, please, Kat, this is how we're starting to structure ourselves in order to do that. So in here, we're looking at revising the governance so that we can really have a clear focus on who's doing the delivery, which is kind of the bottom part of this slide, versus where's the leadership and kind of thought leadership coming from. So to support this, we have got a lot of kind of locally invested partners who will do the doing and control some of that resource and investment conversations locally. But we also want to be shaped by some of the kind of more national thought leaders and scrutiny that can really push the boundaries around innovation and some of that kind of expertise. So in here, thinking around venture capitalists, the kind of health sector, and some of those kind of economic leads, as well as some of the environmental pieces. So quite a complex structure, but one we're just now starting to get off the ground. Thanks, Cap. So in terms of, that's the partnership overview, where we are at the moment, and it will, I think, continually be on a path of evolution as we move forward. But I thought it'd be good to share with you just this national pilot, and through that kind of whole holistic agenda and the scale, this is where we've got ministerial support to be one of 4 national pilots across the UK now. So there's the Severn Partnership, there is Humber, there is Thames and Yorkshire as the 4 national pilots. And within this, what we're looking at is how do we go forward with the best approach to decision making in the context of uncertainty and complexity around climate change. Thanks, Kat. Just click through this. There's some animation on this. Thank you. So traditional approaches to flood risk management require us to kind of forecast climate change, and with that we use predictions and modelling to kind of try and identify what those future rise in water levels are going to be like. We then consider options to deal with kind of level of risk. We select a preferred option which takes into account cost, carbon, environmental benefits, and then we deliver that preferred option. Such an approach is fine when the assumptions we make around climate change and the forecasting are accurate, but we don't always know. And so to be truly resilient, we need to be able to flex, we need to be able to adapt our approach to flood risk management, and we need to be able to take into account various changes in circumstances. So some of that might be how the modelling changes and those forecasts change, but also other impacts such as kind of growth and development. So this is where this national pilot around adaptive pathway comes in. It's all about developing a long-term flexible approach to water management and the decisions we make over the long term around that, which allows us to identify different pathways, so different sequences of potential actions that we might take depending on different possible futures. We can then monitor over time to see what actually happens and what's unfolding, and then we can invest at the right time in the right actions. So this is what we're seeking to do. It's just kicking off now as a national pilot and will run up to 2027, but we'll have a long-term view around planning and decision making. So just taking that a little further, thanks, Kat. This diagram here kind of illustrates where we are at the moment. So as a group of organisations, we have various pathways over time to deliver outcomes that we want to achieve. And so we model where we want to go, see what the impacts can be like, and then we deliver against that. Thanks, Kat. The trouble is that various things in the world we operate have an influence on that pathway. So this could be river levels, it could be water quality, it could be levels of housing. And so all of that starts then to have an influence on our preferred route to get the outcomes we want over time. Thanks, Kat. So as we set off on a pathway for delivery, we can encounter over time some kind of thresholds in some of those kind of trigger points that might be reached. And those trigger points then will have an impact on our pathway, and we might need to deviate onto a new pathway to get to our outcome. Thanks, Kat. And what can happen over time with these different influences? It means that different thresholds are reached at different times, and some thresholds might not be reached at all. So we're going to have to deviate from one pathway to another and to another over time. So this is all about this kind of flexible, adaptive approach that we monitor and can change as we go forward. And it allows us, as we kind of make decisions on water infrastructure, investment, and wider policy decision making, to have that continual re-evaluation and make the best decisions in the faces of uncertainty and change. Thanks, Kat. So this is the thinking. like I said, we are a national pilot. We're just evolving this, but what we're proposing is to produce an adaptive planning framework that will enable us to do this. It will test out the different scenarios over different times. Like I said, some of those could be around the water levels, the water availability, but also thinking then more widely around kind of people, infrastructure, land use, environmental conditions, and what are the different trigger points in those that will mean that we need to stop, pause, evaluate, and consider the path we're on and whether we need to deviate. So within this, we're going to need a whole systems of tools, guidance, processes within this framework that enables us across the partnership to embed this in the different partner organisations so that we have a consistent approach to adaptive planning and decision making. Thanks, Kat. So whilst we're in national pilot, this isn't necessarily new thinking. So some of this adaptive pathway thinking is already seen in the water sector and the health sector. And there are benefits around this that means that we provide the right adaptation measures, that we stay within boundaries of acceptable risks. So under each of those thresholds, we as a collective understand what the trigger points are that we don't want to breach, and therefore at what point do we need to reevaluate and consider our pathways. There are strategic benefits here so that we don't make a decision at a point in time and stick to it, that we do keep reevaluating and that we consider options are left open so that we can maintain a kind of flexible, adaptable approach. This is about the long term, so we keep that reevaluation over a period of time and make sure that we adapt to uncertainty. And in so doing then that we can make the right investment choices that are cost efficient, that are in the right location at the right time, and that we can avoid any white elephants. Thanks, Kat. So the adaptive pathway approach to the River Severn Partnership is about the how. It's going to come alongside that long-term strategy, which will be the what. So between the two, we'll have that whole comprehensive approach over the long term for us as we move forward as that collective. It's for the partnership to see as an opportunity. It's not as a separate project, but that process for how we're going to work and cut across the different organisations in that integrated way. It's going to allow us to adapt and achieve goals across our individual organisations that allow us to adapt to the complexity and uncertainties that we do face. And like I said, we're just at the beginning of this in terms of really understanding what this might mean, how we're going to do it. So we're just about to kick off some kind of scoping phase and the establishment of an adaptive planning group within the River Severn Partnership governance. Thanks, Kat. So in summary, River Severn Partnership, Adaptive Pathway, this isn't about changing everything that we're already doing. I think there's huge value in the projects as organisations that we deliver already, but it is about trying to join the dots on some of those and think bigger, think about scale and more kind of strategic. It is about taking a systems approach, so moving from single issue delivery like flood risk management into actually what role does that have in place and place leadership, and how therefore do we come together across multiple organisations with different agendas to do that holistic infrastructure planning and programming, and that all of us then become advocates for the environment, for environmental management, and see what role that might have across kind of wider agendas. We have already, and this is only 18 months old as a partnership, and as I said, we have been on a natural path of evolution, which I can see continuing. But there have been some challenges and learning already in this. So from that MP caucus, there's clearly a very short-term focus around having ministerial support, having some investment. Therefore, have you already solved all the flooding and water management issues on the Severn? And the reality is we haven't and we won't. Those challenges are very large and are going to take time. So how do we balance this kind of short-term with the long-term ways of working? It is complex. There are multiple agendas here, multiple partners, all with different values that they need and benefits that they need to achieve. So how do we marry that up into that kind of systems map and understand the geography and how this works? This is about co-creation. So as much as this is about structure and doing as it is about culture. And how do we go forward in kind of true co-design, co-creation, collaboration across the area? There are behavioural shifts here, so a lot of emphasis around kind of net zero, societal benefits. So how do we make sure environmental management plays into that and that we can bring that together? And this is about transformation. So yes, this is a partnership about partners coming together and working together, but it's about challenging what we do and evaluating that and evolving it over time. And I will just leave you, so the last slide is just contact details. We do now have a River Severn Partnership website, which we're keeping up to date with information. And then you've got contact details there for myself. And then the Shropshire chair of the partnership is Mark Barrow. So he's Executive Director of Place at Shropshire Council and provides that kind of link into all the local authority leadership teams. Thank you, Juliana.
Okay, super. Thank you ever so much, Hayley. I guess what's really important from what from what you're saying about this national pilot is it's taking, very much a systems-based approach that's flexible and using different scenarios to ultimately achieve the best outcome in times of uncertainty. So, yeah, really interesting. We've got a few questions for you here. So we've got one from Andrea Elsie. How can the River Severn Partnership contribute towards the levelling up agenda in Shropshire?
Yeah, so it's a big part of it. So one of the unique elements of the River Severn Partnership is that link across two devolved nations, so the kind of cross-border work in England and Wales. And so a lot of the conversations that have been happening at kind of ministerial level and kind of with the MPs has been about actually this is a real pioneering partnership around levelling up and devolution, and what does that mean going forward. So that's quite a kind of key link on the local authority side.
One from Luke Neal. How are local communities being involved in the River Severn Partnership, like for example local flood action groups, are they involved?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say there's kind of more work needed on that. I think to date, it's kind of focused probably more strategically around understanding the different partner organisations and what that shared agenda is. One of the demonstrator programmes that's kind of emerged out of that is around hazard to opportunity. And so some work probably needed around less around kind of capital delivery and more around that bottom-up cultural behavioural piece. And so we've just kicked off conversations there around some of the flood forums, and could we bring them together into more of a strategic approach, for example, around incident management and recovery and what role community groups have in some of that. So I think that's work that's starting to emerge and needs to go forward.
Okay, great. And actually following on from that, Pascal has asked something kind of similar really about, if there's any scope for any of the smaller projects and other organisations in Shropshire for them to be involved in it, especially when we think about the Shrewsbury Water Forum, because there's about 40 people involved in that group who've got huge amounts of expertise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The door's well open.
Okay, so we need to get in contact with Hayley. Okay, one from Paul Lindup. Actually, no, I'm going to bring that one back later because I'm going to bring that back for Guy again later. Sorry, Guy. Again, another from Paul Lindup. Huge scale project and rightly looking at megatrends. Are there bite-sized actions you can delegate to smaller groups? So I guess that's similar, actually. It's asking the same question.
Yeah, I think, and that's where we're trying to get to with these demonstrator programs, is understanding the projects that sit within that and having task and finish groups around those so that we can go from the bottom up and then feed it up into that strategic kind of lobbying piece. So it is about marrying the two.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, Hayley. Just a couple more. One from Chris Taylor. What is a long-term pilot timescale for the pilots?
So the pilots, the actual doing on that adaptive pathway is up to 2027, but it needs to look at horizon up to 2100 and beyond. Well, kind of 2100 really is kind of what we're looking at in terms of a timescale.
Okay. Ken, there's one. I'll get just one more here from Vicky Aiton. Where is the most urgent need for innovation in the River Severn pilot?
Oh, that's an interesting, because it's going to vary. Interestingly, I think water resource is rearing its head over flood. A flood gets a lot of the kind of profile because of hitting the press and things, but actually some of those water resource pressures are going to be really acute. We started doing some of the kind of mapping around that against things like agri-tech and where's food going out, and so places like Vale of Evesham starting to come on the agenda around hugely important agriculturally wise, but actually water resilience wise, there's a massive challenge there. So it's starting to unpick some of that and understand those locations.
Okay, and just one more, if I may, from George Whitworth. He's asking about cross-border cooperation. He's saying, in broad terms, how can England pay for Welsh work?
I've had to have legal advice on this, because part of the investment that kind of the partnership has been able to secure has obviously come down through English government. But given the River Severn Partnership, you can't have an approach that just spends money on the English side and not the Welsh side. So the legal advice on this is that we can spend money in Wales as long as the kind of benefit is shown to be including England. And I think there's a recognition through the partnership, through the adaptive pathway, through the strategy work. This is a catchment approach, source to sea. You can't cut it off at a boundary. So that's all very much part of it.
Thank you ever so much, Hayley. There are several more questions, but again, we'll send those across to you if we may, so they can be answered fully. So once again, thank you ever so much, Hayley, for your contribution today. Great insight into what's happening in the River Severn Partnership.